Hello everyone, this is Alazir Chess here to help you to realize your potential, and today we're going to be looking at a famous game with a lot of sacrifices, a very exciting game played by Rashid Nezhmetdinov versus Oleg Chernikov. Now, Rashid Nezhmetdinov was a very strong international master. He was also one of Tal's trainers and coaches. If you don't know who Tal is, he's one of the greatest attacking players of all time as well. He was Nez's student, and he became world champion. Oleg Chernikov was a strong grandmaster, a strong Soviet GM, and these two guys are going to battle it out. Let's get into it. Nez opens with pawn to e4, controlling the center light squares d5 and f5, and preparing to develop its bishop and its queen. Here, black plays the Sicilian defense, pawn to c5, asymmetrically controlling the d4 square. Here, Nez plays knight to f3, attacking the center squares d4 and e5. Black responds with knight to c6, controlling the center squares d4 and e5. And white plays pawn to d4. This is what's known as the open Sicilian. After pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, and white getting a half-open d-file to operate on for its major pieces, the queen and the rooks, and black getting a half-open c-file for the same purpose for his queen and his rooks. And especially if white were to bring his king to the queen side by castling queenside later, and black would put a rook on the half-open c-file. We're not going to see that in this game though. Here, black plays g6. This is known as the accelerated dragon. Here, black is going to put the bishop on g7, fianchettoing it, or placing it along the long diagonal of the board, controlling f6, e5, d4, c3, b2, and potentially a1 if the b pawn would ever move or be taken later. So the bishop is going to be maximized and its potential for square control. Here, white plays knight to c3, developing its queen's knight. Black plays bishop to g7. Now, there's a knight and a bishop converging on the d4 square, threatening this knight on d4. It's not a great idea for white to take, as black will take back with the b pawn, getting a bigger center, having this pawn, and this pawn, c, d, and e, versus white's e and c pawns, getting ready to come down the middle of the board. Also, you would wind up opening up black's b file for his rook to operate on later, pressurizing your pawn on b2, so that's not a good idea. It's also not a good idea to move away and lose time in the opening, so Nez plays bishop to e3, developing while defending his knight on d4. Here, Chernikov responds with knight to f6, which develops his last kingside minor piece, prepares castling kingside, and puts a little bit of pressure on the pawn on e4. So here, Nez plays bishop to c4, which facilitates his development and castling kingside. Here, black plays castles kingside, and white plays bishop to b3. Now, here Chernikov plays knight to g4. This move hangs the knight, but when Nez takes, the queen has taken her eyes off of this knight on d4, which means that black can take back. And here, black's idea is that if you don't do anything about this, the knight's going to take the bishop, and black is going to wind up with the bishop pair in an open position. So Nez takes, Chernikov takes, and Nez plays queen to h4. This is designed to get off of this d-pawn moving in the future, and the light squared bishop behind it hitting the white queen. So queen to h4 puts some pressure on the pawn on e7, potentially threatens later to play bishop to h6, which threatens to exchange off this very powerful bishop on g7. Here, black plays queen to a5. Now, black has a threat of playing knight takes bishop, and you can't take back toward the center, because after knight takes bishop, if you were to take back toward the center with the a pawn, then in this position, let's say white were to play a random move, let's say queen takes pawn, knight takes bishop, a takes, and queen takes, winning the rook. And if you were to do anything else, let's say you play c takes b3, black can give up his powerful bishop in order to play queen takes pawn with a check. Your king cannot stay on the back rank because, say, king to f1, you lose a rook with check. So you would have to step up the board. And here, black has the potential for playing d5. He has the potential to play b6 and bishop to a6 here, which forces the king up the board to the f3 square. And at that point, he could bring in the rooks because the rooks would be connected. There's a lot of ways that white could fall under attack here. So here, after queen to a5, Nez just simply castles. Now, black plays bishop to f6, and what black was hoping for in this game was that Nez would repeat moves with queen to h6, bishop g7, queen h4 3 times, and get a draw. But here, Nez didn't do that. He fought for 45 minutes and uncorked one of the greatest moves in chess history with queen takes bishop, exclam. Here, if black were to take, then white plays bishop takes knight, and his bishop is already in the center, attacking this very weak black king side, where the dark squares are very weak. The f7 pawn is pinned by the bishop on b3, and the knight is going to hop into d5, attacking the pawn on f6, and black's position is riddled with weaknesses, and black is underdeveloped as this rook is just here to guard this pawn basically. This rook on a8 isn't doing anything, the c8 bishop isn't doing anything, and the queen is way too valuable to give herself up in most situations because white has a 2-for-1 deal. Yes, you gave up the queen, but you do have 2 pieces for it. So black would have to get 2 pieces for his queen if black were to return the sacrifice. Otherwise, he would just wind up being down 1 piece and losing the game. So here, after queen takes bishop, Chernikov played knight to e2 check. And here, this drags the white knight out of the center to slow down white's initiative. The initiative being the fact that white is on the attack. So here, black finally takes the queen. Now, white plays knight c3, bringing his knight back to the center. Black responds with rook to e8, and white plays knight to d5. Black cannot play rook takes pawn due to knight takes pawn check, and then picking up the rook with a fork. So here, black plays rook to e6, and white responds with bishop to d4, putting 2 attackers on the f6 pawn. So black plays king to g7 to defend the pawn, and now white plays rook a d1, which is a very, very important move. You see, you need to get one of these rooks into play. The target square is f3, so in order to do so, Nez brings the rook to the center, and he's going to perform what's known as a rook lift, bringing the rook up in front of the pawns and out, because you can't get a rook into play in chess without either having some of your pawns be captured, such as the d pawn was captured earlier when we go back to black's third move. Now this half-open d file is finally made use of, and white can swing the rook up and over through the d file. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get this rook into play. Like you always have to either lose a pawn or break your structure to bring the rook into play. So here, after rook a1, Chernikov plays d6 in order to bring the light squared bishop into the game and the queen's rook after the bishop comes into play. So we have rook to d3, we have bishop to d7, and now we have rook to f3, putting pressure on the f6 pawn for a third time. Now after bishop to b5, attacking the rook on f1, Nez plays bishop to c3, attacking Chernikov's queen. So here, Chernikov plays queen to d8, bringing the queen back to defend f6, but Nez does not care. He cracks through the position anyway. Now, knight takes f6. If you were to return the material, you would wind up just being down a pawn if you were to trade everything off, and Nez would have a better structure and winning chances. But here, bishop to e2 was played. Now this active rook on f3 is under attack, and Nez plays knight takes pawn. Here, if king takes knight were played, we would have rook takes f7, check, king to h6, bishop to g7, check, and in the case of king to g5, we would have bishop takes rook, and if bishop takes rook, we have f4 check, and if king to h5, we have g4 check, and after king h4, we would have bishop to f6 with check, and if g5, we would have rook h7 mate, and if queen takes bishop, we would have rook h7 mate. Now, in the case of king to h5, we would have bishop takes rook, and if bishop takes rook, g4 check, king to h4, king takes bishop, and black can't move anything. In the case of queen g8, to keep an eye on these kingside squares on h8 and h7, we would have bishop f6 check, king to h3, and g5, cementing the bishop, unleashing the other bishop with check. And in the case of king h4, rook e7 is lights out, because if the black queen moves away from the h-file, rook h7 is mate. And if the black queen moves to the h-file, we can capture her and then capture the pawn on b7. And if black were to play queen takes bishop, well, queen takes bishop, you're just down a piece and the game is over. Now, in the case of king takes on h2, rook e7 also again prepares rook h7 if you were to move away. So even if you play queen takes bishop here, like rook takes queen, and d6 is hanging, rook e7, h7 is a mate threat, which it wasn't before because rook h7 here would run into queen h3 check, and black would be great here with the extra exchange. White would have to fight for a draw if it's even possible. So here, going back to the game continuation, we see that on knight takes h7, black played king to g8. Now, here, Nezhmetdinov responded with rook to h3, and in this position, rook e5 was played. Bishop to h5 here would run into bishop takes rook, pawn takes, knight f6 check, king f7, and pawn g4 trapping the bishop. And after pawn to e5, cutting off the bishop on c3 from protecting the knight on f6, we would have rook to f3, and the bishop on h5 is still trapped. You can't give back the queen for the knight and the rook, because this is going to happen with check, and the bishop will be lost. And if you do anything else, such as king e6, pawn takes, knight to d5, and where can you go here? For example, if h4, trying to get the pawn closer so you can bring the queen in for a mating attack on g2, rook f6 check, king to d7, rook f7 check, king to e8, rook g7, and there's nothing that black can do here. King to h1 and rook to g1 is coming, and if you go to the side of the board with king c6, rook c7 forces black to give the queen back, because if king b5, a4, king takes pawn, rook a1, king b5, rook a5 is mate. And if you choose to play king to a6, pawn to b4, threatening pawn to b5 mate, say queen g8 check, king h1, h3, b5 is mate, and if black were to play pawn b5 himself, then here we can play rook to a1, threatening a takes b5, and rook a5 check and mate. Also, if pawn takes, you just open up everything against yourself here. So, returning to the game continuation, black plays rook to e5, shutting down the dark square diagonal of the bishop, so this way you can try to survive the attack. Because what white would like to do would be to move this knight out of the way and bring the rook down to mate2, or bring this knight back to f6 if you move the rook, or g5, depending on the situation. So rook e5 is trying to give back some material to survive, but it's answered by pawn to f4. Now, if black were to move the rook, we would run into knight f6 with further problems. So here, bishop takes rook was played, and king takes bishop. Now here, Chernikov brings his last piece into play, and he's threatening to play an exchange sacrifice if rook takes bishop here. So Nez moved the bishop to d4, and Chernikov played pawn to b5. Now, this move is designed to potentially play rook c4 to shut off the bishops, but here Nez played knight to g5, and Chernikov attempted to defend with rook c7. In the case of rook to c4, like here, you would have bishop taking, rook to h8, king takes, knight takes f7, and knight takes queen. But on rook c7, we have the stunning bishop takes pawn, check. Now, after rook takes, we have rook to h8, check. And in the case of king to g7, we have rook takes queen, rook takes pawn, check, knight back to f3 to block, and put two attackers on the e5 rook. And there's nothing much for black to do here. Let's just say black plays rook takes pawn. We have rook takes d6 here, and if rook e1 check, we have knight takes, and you can't take back due to the pin. And if rook takes the bishop, we would have rook takes back, and black is down a knight and two pawns, game over. So here, Nezhmetdinov played after rook h8, his opponent played king takes, knight takes f7 check, king to h7, knight takes queen, rook takes e4, knight c6, rook takes f4 check, king e2, and black had enough and resigned. Here, the two pieces and the extra pawn outweigh the rook. These pawns on the queen side are going to be scooped up and the game is going to be over very soon. So, what do you guys think of this game? Now, here, I would like to invite you to come with me and study the variations on this game. I found them to be incredibly instructive. Time to turn on the notation. And here, let's go back to the very beginning and look through the sub-variations. Now, I would also invite you guys to, here, if you would like to continue to look at the variations, great. If not, let me know what I could do on my channel to make anything better. Please write your suggestion in the comments, and have a great day. But for those of you who want to continue, let's have a look at everything. In the case of after bishop to e3, queen b6 runs into knight d5. If queen a5 check, the bishop can come back to d2. On queen a4, we would have knight to e2 here. And if queen takes e4, we have knight c7 check. On king to d8, we have knight ec3 hitting the queen. And this creates major problems for black. So if bishop takes, then you could just play knight takes back here. Black can't castle and he's lost the pride of his position. The dark squared bishop, the game is over. In the case of on bishop to d2, queen back to d8, white can play bishop to c3 here. And in the event of e6, you can play knight b5, sacrificing the d5 knight because it cannot be taken due to bishop takes g7. And bishop takes g7 also hits the rook in the corner. Here, on bishop c4, if knight takes e4 for black, going for the immediate center fork trick without being castled, it runs into knight takes e4, d5, bishop to b5, pinning the knight on c6, queen to a5, check does nothing because the knight just returns to c3 and white is up a piece. So on d takes e4 instead, bishop b5, d takes e4, knight takes knight, pawn takes, bishop takes with check, bishop to d7, bishop takes the rook in the corner, queen takes back, and bishop to d4. Here black could play f6 and white can castle with a winning position, although it does require some work. Here on bishop to d4 though, if black plays the sneaky e3, unleashing the queen on the long diagonal, we have bishop takes, queen takes pawn hitting the rook, and also threatening checkmate on f2 with queen takes pawn. Here though, white has rook to f1, and on pawn takes, we have rook takes, and if queen to g1 check, we have rook back to block, queen to e3 check, and queen e2, and white is winning. Here, after knight g4, if knight takes e6, knight takes e3, knight takes d8, knight takes d1, here this would trade off all the pieces, and let's just throw on our good friend the engine. And here black is better. In the event of rook takes d1, rook takes d8, because black has the bishop pair in an open position. And if white were to try to get funny with any knight takes f7 business, then you have knight takes c3. And this busts the dark squares open. If pawn takes, the bishop's going to take with a check, picking up the rook in the corner. And if anything else, let's say you try to do a double check discovery, king to the corner, and on knight back, you can just sacrifice the rook. And on bishop takes, you have knight takes pawn. And here, black has two minor pieces for the rook with an advantageous position. Here, after knight takes, queen h4, queen a5, castles, bishop f6, queen takes, knight e2, knight takes, pawn takes, knight c3, rook e8. Here, if queen to d8 instead of rook e8, knight d5, rook e8, bishop to d4, rook e5, exclam. Pawn to f4, rook takes knight, exclam. Bishop takes, pawn to f5, pawn takes, and don't take back, opening up your king, but d6, opening the bishop. Pawn takes pawn, h takes, and this position is basically equal, but black is not coming under the heavy attack that he faced in the game. So queen to d8 would have been an improvement on this game and would have potentially allowed black to save himself. Here, after rook to e8, we have knight d5, rook e6, bishop to d4, king g7, rook a1, d6, rook d3, bishop to d7, rook f3, bishop to b5. Here, bishop c3. Now, queen a6, the only other square to go to besides d8, runs into knight to c7, which is a problem, hitting the queen and the rook. On knight takes f6, here, if we have rook takes knight, again, let's take a look at this. And the simple rook to d1, and you're stuck in the pin. You're going to wind up here being 2 pawns down, because next is rook takes bishop, or bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, king takes, and rook takes d6 is the threat. Among other things, if you were to try to run away, you're just going to lose major material. Here, we also have other variations. So after bishop c3, queen to d8, knight takes f6. If bishop takes rook, we have knight g4 check, opening up the dark squared bishop, king to g8, bishop takes rook, queen g5. Otherwise, if you were to take this, knight h6 is mate. So queen g5 is the only move. You have to cover the h6 square. Then we run into bishop takes f7, king f8, bishop takes g6, king e7, bishop f6 check, queen takes, knight takes, and after pawn takes bishop, king takes bishop, and white's winning. But on knight takes f6 here, black had a move. He had rook to c8. This would have been a double exclamation. Here, bishop to d4, bishop c4, knight takes h7, and after rook e5, black is holding on, and might even be slightly better. Now, in the case of knight to d7 check, king g8, knight f6 could be a draw, and if king to f8, knight takes on h7, king e8, knight to f6 check, king e7, knight to d5 check. Like, if you were to take, then the bishop could take and white is doing good again. But if you try to run away with king to d7, you're going to get hit with rook takes f7. And the game's going to be over soon after king e8, rook h7. And there's just too many hits once again. For example, if bishop takes this knight, we have rook h8, king f7, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, bishop takes, and white is winning again. Now, in the game continuation after bishop e2, knight takes h7, king g8, here rook h3, we covered here bishop to h5, would run into bishop takes rook, and after king takes knight, we covered rook takes on f7 and the variations that that leads to. There's a lot more analysis here, but those are all the pertinent variations. Black had two ways to hold, guys. He had the variation with rook to c8 on move 21. Instead of playing bishop to e2 or bishop takes rook, he should have looked to give some material back with rook to c8. Also, he had queen to d8 on move 14. So, thank you guys for watching, and have a great night. Work hard and get better. Peace.